You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hey gang, it's Dr. Alan Garfinkel, Rock Art Podcast, episode 108. We're bringing back the big man, Dr. Tirtha Mukhopadhyay from Guanajuato University, and it's a deep dive into the mysteries of what makes rock art tick, what is iconicity, what is shamanism, animism, totemism, and why is rock art so emotionally appealing. Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is episode 108. And we're talking to Dr. Tirtha Mukhopadhyay, all the way from Guanajuato University in the wonderful country of Mexico. And we're going to talk about iconicity, the sacred, and the emotive potential of rock art. Doctor, are you there for us?
Yes, I'm right here for you, Alan. Thank you once again for inviting me to talk on your podcast. And I'm really excited and look forward to talking to you.
And this is the first time we get to see each other. We get a video with it. This is exciting. Yeah. So we have a remarkable book coming out, don't we?
Yes, of course. It just got published.
And it's called The Iconicity of the Uto-Aztecans. Wow. What a mouthful. Yes. What the heck is iconicity?
Yes, iconicity. It's an ambitious title, but we have been working a long time on this project, and I guess we have defined iconicity well enough for the reader. We hope the reader finds the notion of iconicity interesting. The fact the icons, iconic tokens, symbols, or codes, however you might want to call it, are carried through generations of people who share the same linguistic and same cognitive environment to negotiate, and it's continuous cultural, historical tradition of symbolism and expressions and, self-appraisal.
If I use the terms indexical semiotics, what does that mean? Indexical semiotics.
Right. As we have discussed it already in the book at sufficient length, and the index is a far more basic terminology for the visual representation or a visual sign. So if we begin with the question, the character of the sign, what does a sign mean? What does a visual symbol mean? We begin discussing the index value, the indexical property of the visual sign. So it's the basic visual sign. The index refers to something concrete. For instance, it might be an animal form.
Right. Yes. It's an emblem. It's a hallmark. It's a meaning of a meaning.
Yes.
There's something powerful here that's a symbol that you can grasp and see and sense and taste. But it has a power greater than it has on the first appearance. There's much
Yes.
more to it. Yeah.
Right. Yes, we can put it that way, that the index is the portal, and we begin to understand the significance of the image through the index, through the upfront indexical form of the visual sign. But then we try to go beyond that. We try to transcend the indexical properties in order to detect, to understand, to even institutionalize some of the meanings, the deeper cultural meanings that are inherent in that symbol, the way it used to communicate to people who made those representations on the rocks in the first place.
Let's give our audience something concrete. We've thrown a lot of words around. Give them some examples of some of the icons that we might deal with when we're dealing with various cultures.
Yes, we can think of, to begin with, if we refer to some of the Mesoamerican symbolism, one of the most important and most concrete symbols that comes to mind is that of the serpent, the snake. And the snake index is something which we have been dealing with for a long time now. The snake index is visible in not just in the very prominent and intelligible Aztec iconography. The snake index appears in very rudimentary or vestigial outlier forms in the more fringe culture rock art specimens, where you may just have a zigzagging line. Those wave formations in rock art, on vessels, on clay pots, which would be used to store water in a very desiccated environment.
And we know it also appears on textiles, on basketry, as a diagonal or a triangle itself.
In all those decorative and sacred and, cultural paraphernalia that defines a culture, the beliefs of that culture. And it's really great to see how that particular index might evolve into more concrete forms, like a basic snake index in the Uto Aztecan speaking peoples, in their visual expressions and their cultural artifacts, grows into the great.
If we jump to the cultures of, let's say, the Desert West,
yes,
there's another symbol that I would call an indexical animal, and one that really interfingers for thousands upon thousands of years, and it looks like a bighorn sheep. Am I correct?
Of course, the bighorn sheep is one of the chief valorized indexical animal that we have, and it's just, the sheep is the index animal. It's a zoomorphic index. It's an animal index, but it really transports us to the world of the Aztec, Uto-Aztecan symbolism, the American Desert West symbolism, which suggests that the sheep is food, that the sheep is sustenance, that the sheep can be divine, because it's a form in which the divine comes to us. What we do is we continue to attribute significance to it. And this was a very crucial point to which I wanted to draw attention to in today's conversation, if you would allow me, Alan. The fact that the supernatural attribution to visual indexes. This brings us to the point where we begin to ask, what's the relationship between a visual index and the emotive symbolic meaning that the visual object represents? In other words, can we explain this indexical sign in terms of referentiality? We cannot do that, because there are so many interspersed non-referential elements in that visual index. It's a symbol of fertility. It's a symbol of giving. It's a symbol of provisions. And it is ultimately a symbol of a faith, of a belief that in the universe, in nature, that there is a protector, there's an animal master. So my question would be, really, for myself, for a research personnel who have been investigating this notion of the relationship, not the notion, but the relationship between an index and its symbolic value, is whether there is a very concrete tether, a concrete connection between the visual index and the symbol. Let me try to clarify myself, make myself more clear. I'm now beginning to believe that the sacred feeling that is inherent in a visual index is not necessarily physically or manifestly related to the visual symbol, to the visual index at all. This is why I say this, is because when you consider the human-like gods, the anthropomorphs and the providers and the pregnant bighorn sheep, for example, it's easier to understand what the symbol ultimately represents: a divinity, a provider, spirit. But when it comes to the geometricals, they're simpler, they're more elemental, they're scarce, they're minimalist. And the only reason that these geometrical symbols, they may be more complex, as in sand paintings, for example, more meaningful. But
Yes.
Even when they appear on the rock, they continue to create that experience of wonder and beauty, and there's something very sacred. Even if we are not conditioned, we feel that it creates a very specific kind of experience for us in that setting.
There's something very mysterious and compelling about
Yes.
the image. Sometimes we can't put our finger on it.
Exactly.
We don't know exactly why we're feeling the way we're feeling, but we do
Right.
know there's something intense there. There's a
Yes.
tug. It's a
Yes.
tether. It's
Yes.
how do you put this? It's some sort of there's an unction. That's a good word.
Mhm.
That is calling us to a deeper understanding of what this symbol means. And I think we get a feeling that
Yes.
it's something grander than ourselves and has a transcendental quality. How's that?
Yes, very, very well said, Alan. You've just been able to describe for me, for example, when the experience that we have when we look at these matte patterns, the matte patterns, for example, and there are matte patterns, the chakras, the mandalas, however way we call it, in all this vast spread of religions across the world, from Central Asia to Siberia and into, consistent with prehistoric migration of the haplogroups as they have been described in the literature. That there is this common ground of belief and this common sense of creating beauty out of simple patterns, simple circles and geometrical shapes, and they're all there for our contemplation. Isn't it something very strange and wonderful at the same time, and very difficult to explain?
Yet there's something else implied.
Yes.
And the something else implied is when you have a circle, when you have a network, when you have some sort of a conduit, it's leading somewhere. It's entwining you. It's bringing you into another level of environment or thinking or
Appreciation.
some sort of other. It's got an otherworldly feeling to it.
Yes. I mean, these are attractors. These are great attractors, and we visit rock art sites, and we have a decorative chakra in our home and on the wall, and we don't know why, but they have a certain effect on us.
Yeah, why do people to this very
Yes.
day
Mhm.
buy those little spider things that are the Indian things it's got a web or
Yes.
a nest and they hang it in their car? Why?
Right. Yes. It's not just the shape of it. It's not just the way it looks, but it makes us look at itself in a way which is different. This is why we could call this phenomenon in the human mind the rock art way of seeing things.
Right. You said you called it the archaeology of emotions,
Yes. Yes.
which was surprising. I'd never heard those terms joined in ever. So that was really quite striking. the archaeology of emotions. And so I think I mentioned this to Chris Webster when he was interviewing me for my last discussion with him. And I said that there are these images on rocks that appear to be these figures that are leaping or growing or somehow coming out of cracks in the rocks, right?
Right.
And they're large, and they're obviously something of importance. They're beautiful. They're aesthetically pleasing.
Yes. And they make you feel contented. They make you feel whole.
Pleasant.
Yes.
Yes.
They make
Aesthetically
you feel
pleasing.
Yes.
You say, that's really beautiful. That's really interesting. Someone did a beautiful job of ensconcing that image in just the right way on that. And what do we see off to the left, just under that, is a very small creature with their hands like this, opening to the sky in a supplicant posture. Well, it's obviously that's explaining or further explicating or elucidating what's going on here. That little being is entreating this larger image for help, for healing, for blessings, for reassurance, all those things that we want as human beings. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yes, that's where it leads to. I mean, so we are not just dealing with an index. We are dealing with an animated and interanimated property within that index, which is affecting us in a very strange way. And it might even be that it is this very primordial sense of someone, not just something, and not just some level of experience that we would call it, that there is someone coming there and taking the seat and then offering its deep bond of friendship to us. Yes,
that's a good juncture to catch on the flip-flop, gang. Welcome back, gang. This is segment 2 of the Rock Art Podcast with Tirtha Mukhopadhyay, and we're talking about indexical thinking. We're talking about semiotics. We're talking about the way of seeing and the way of understanding rock art and dealing with the concept of iconicity. Tirtha, why don't we continue there?
Yes, the rock art, like any other great art in different contexts, and humanity has continued to produce rock artists in all ages of art, I guess, if we can call it that way. And the phrase that we were just tossing around was the rock art way of seeing. And it's of immense significance, because the rock art way of seeing prompts us to question the positivist way of looking at things. And even the whole Western notion of seeing things and the discourse that we have associated with the appreciation of arts for several centuries now. I mean, it's not wrong. It's just a different way of looking at things, and this is important because we de-Westernize, we de-Eurocentricize ourselves, we depositivize ourselves in order to expect, in order to immerse ourselves. It's an immersive practice. When you look at the world the way the Native Americans have been looking at nature for thousands of years, at the way the Siberian shamans would look at nature, would look at human destiny.
What we're talking about is an indigenous perspectivism. We're talking about dismantling a linear way of thinking or a Cartesian way of thinking.
Yes.
And one that's more holistic.
Absolutely.
One that's more embracing in the energies of the universe and somehow cosmically entwining with the rock art and understanding the world in a much more conceptual, unified, relationship-oriented fashion. How's that?
Yes, it's all that, and it's more graceful. It makes you more humble. It makes you more receptive. It makes you more of a human being rather than more of a warrior.
If we think about it from the Judeo-Christian ethic and you look at things scripturally, it says that we're supposed to be masters of the universe. We're supposed to own the resources and use them and engineer things for our own benefit.
Yes. It's basically a humanist idea.
Right. That is contradictory to an indigenous perspective, correct?
Yes, that's an alternative. And, there are various ways and methods. There are sciences associated with this position, with this way of seeing things, and the integrity of the process. That the visual object, the art object, the sacred object, it's the way we look at the world, we look at deeper levels of being. We could call it for the moment the plants, that nature, flowers, that the hallucinogenic and theogenic properties of plants and flowers and leaves and they could influence us. They could induce in us those visions. I mean, not necessarily, because hallucinogens can produce very extremely strange, otherworldly, alternated states of consciousness. But the sacred art is not merely about an altered states of consciousness. And I think even the discussion in archaeology, which was founded in a sense by the theorists on entoptics and phosphenes and the form constants of rock art, as they used to call it. Even then, the argument falls apart, it disintegrates when we consider the fact that we are not talking just about an impression, a visual impression, an optical illusion. We are talking about something emotive. We're talking about something that moves us and something that reassures us. And therefore, this invites us to think of a very different kind of psychology than that of the positivist psychological literatures. So what about the rock art way of seeing things then? The rock art way of seeing things not only explains the way we look at rock art and rock art looks at us, it helps us to understand, it helps us to appreciate, to dig into the deep time religious consciousness that might have attended the evolution of post-Paleolithic man.
Absolutely. That you've hit the nail on the head, Tirtha, because you can see that in the rock art. Rock art speaks to those that want to listen or ask better and better questions. And it shows us the values, the ethics, the salient elements of meaning that indigenous people had about the world.
That's exactly how, when they visit their sacred spaces, that the gods, they come to bless them. They come to give them all the fruits, the products, the abundance they bring with them. And this is what we repeatedly see in all the great religions. In Japan, you have to walk up a hill in order to come and stand. You have to purify yourself, wash your hands, wash your feet, your face, and then come and stand in front of that kami, that spirit, God, who is there for you, and this God will then listen to your prayers. This is exactly the same thing that's happening in the rock art clusters for these Native American peoples in their sacred baskets. This will be guiding. This will be controlling, conditioning the way we store our grain, the way we hold water, the way we serve food, the sense of community. Everything changes when you look at life and your relationship to another human being, to the others, to every person, when you're looking at it with the eyes of the rock art shaman.
When you're looking at it with the eyes of God, when you're looking at it as a deity,
yes,
and
exactly.
you're asking, "What do you want of me, God? What do you want of me, deity? What are you
Yes.
trying to communicate?
Yes.
How am I supposed to conduct my affairs? And how will this affect me and my family as I try to live an ethical,
Yes.
moral life
Yes.
that
Yes.
reimburses you for what you've given me? When I go and kill an animal, you will show me what to do so I can show respect and acknowledge. When I'm able to harvest, when I see the rain and the rain comes,
Yes.
and I thank you for
Yes.
that blessing.
The deity, the rock art, the Nahuatl word for it,
Yes.
since we are closer to this context, the Nahuatl word for the divine spirit is Teo, like Teotl.
Teotl. Teotl.
Teotl, yes. Teotl. In Anglophone pronunciation, it's more like Teotl. So the Teotl is a very interesting kind of presence. So again, going back to or regressing to this idea of the visual index, the Teotl of the index, if we were to call it that, it does not exercise or impose its control over you. It's more like a mendicant. It's more like expecting you to help the Teotl out by receiving the Teotl, giving him a space in your heart or in your mind. And that changes the perspective of any conversation on transcendent presences and the symbolism of religions. And it's not a very fierce, exacting. It's like it's the commandments. Now let's think of the commandments. The commandments may be very strict on you, but the idea that God is love, that God is wherever there is bonding, friendship, love, the texture of culture itself. And the texture of culture itself takes on a very different kind of meaning and perspective when we are in union with the presence of these deities and spirits who are part of ourselves, who are not there in a space which is very far away and very transcendent and very heroic. It's within the fabric of our lives. This is exactly why the rock art visual index.
These deities, instead of being distant, are close. And,
yes, they're part of. They come to the basket.
They're on the rocks. You can touch them. You can feel them. They're in the baskets. Yes. They're on the textiles. They're in the sky. They're on the earth.
What this leads to, therefore, is to question, in what phase of human evolution did this sense of the presence of deific entities arise? In what stage of evolution? And I have been looking at it with some interest. It's a vast subject, and you need an entire tome of literature to deal with how humans, if they did migrate out of Africa, if you subscribe to the out of Africa theory, the first migrations of the LMN haplogroups towards Asia, to the Near East and the Caspian Sea and the Mediterranean, and then towards the East. And then from there, these different stratas of civilizations that have come into being following these migrations. The presence of Neanderthals 110,000 years before present. The presence of Neanderthals, the intermixture possible or not. It's in anthropology, there's no real evidence of an intermixture of Homo sapiens with Homo neanderthalis. But there is evidence of the use of fire. There is and carbon-dated locations of community feasts, communal feasts, getting together, feasting. The idea of food, eating together, sharing, contentment, sitting around the fire or a hearth, these would have to be integral to the phases in which the notion of a provider, a protector, animal master,
All the above, yes.
spirit of the rains.
But the oldest rock art we're now finding can be 110,000 years old, right? With those little scrapes on the rocks where they've got curvilinear meanders and other things like that in caves.
Yes, of which we do not really understand much,
Then we think about Neanderthals and those red blotches.
Yes.
And the scrapes that are on those big, huge hunks of red hematite.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the bones and the fossil records. So this might be pointing to a period before the Homo neanderthalis and the Homo sapiens and the Homo australopithecine, when the humans, like 200, 300,000 years before present, when the bipedal, prehensile enabled humans were really beginning to...
The seeds are being sowed of something greater than their individual self. And let's leave it there. See you on the flip-flop, gang, for the next segment. We're back, gang. This is your Rock Art Podcast, and we're talking about the meaning of meanings. We're talking about rock art, and it's the archaeology of emotions, the iconicity, and dealing with how does the indigenous person think, and what do these images on stone possibly communicate? What's their emotional value, and what can we see and feel and sense from trying to understand them? Dr. Tirtha, you're back?
Yes.
Talk about some of the basic elements of religion that anthropologists have tried to suss out from shamanism, animism, totemism.
These are various forms of the same human intuitiveness. It's an intuitive way of, looking, intuitive methodology, intuitive epistemology. All the epistemes are right there.
Animism is at the heart of some of this.
Yes.
And we're thinking about sort of this indigenous ontology.
Right.
This indigenous way of thinking.
Right.
It's an animistic way of thinking. What do we mean by that?
What we mean, and maybe now we would have to take our departure with the kind permission of more positivistically inclined thinkers on this point. What we mean by animistic intuition is that the human being always had the ability to intuit into the presence of a master spirit and a friend and a giver. This intuition of the other, the intuition of that, that kami, that Shintoistic kami, the Chiang, as the Chinese Confucians would say it, the Deva, as the Hindu and the Buddhist, the Bodhisattvas, all the Buddhas are all there they are in the bonsai, they're in the springs, and they're in heaven and in the hearts of man and woman. This intuitiveness, if we call this a kind of intuitive process. Interestingly, even clinical psychology is trying to cope up with this massive faith in the supernatural attributes, which are completely illogical, irrational, and which do not have any basis in when we try to analyze how the structure of human experience. But the very, very unexpected element in this question, what is very unexpected and surprising, is that this intuitiveness into the presence of a supernatural entity with supernatural attributes may have a positive effect on well-being and human happiness. And it's not necessarily creating a crisis or anxiety.
No, it's not at all. Absolutely not.
Yes.
And in fact, what they've found is often people who have deep-seated psychological or physiological or other problems with depression or anxiety or other just overwhelming circumstances,
Yes.
when they provide them with altered states of consciousness using some sort of a medicament of sorts,
Yes.
where they grasp and see and sense the supernatural, it makes them happy. It gives them something to live for. It shows them another side of the universe.
Yes, absolutely fascinating how the ancient civilizations or ancient peoples have been tapping into the resources of herbs and, psilocybins, the ayahuasca, the peyote, the datura.
And even independent of these other psychotropic entities,
Yes.
right? We get there from dancing. We get there
Yes.
from singing. We get there from staying up for days on end and drumming
Yes.
and humming. And we induce a state of ecstasy.
Yes, of happiness, of sharing, the communal life. And this is such a wonderful aspect of human existence. And you don't need the psilocybin. You don't need
No.
You don't need them. But you could use them. You could also
Sure.
use them.
Sure.
And even chemical opioids will create a much tougher crisis for societies. So there's no reason why we should castigate the practice of hallucinogenic, entheogenic substance uses, and why the law should not absorb these elements for a better life and for medicinal uses. It's more medicinal. It's more medicinal. I mean, these are well-known facts, but the one thing that we cannot afford to lose sight of in this process is the emotive core, the core of grace, the core of being attuned with supernatural attributes or entities who are not distant, but who are so close to the texture of our lives.
A personal connection.
Yes.
A supernatural connection, touching, feeling, communicating, the essence, feeling a connection and some sort of a tether to those beings that will allow one to be reassured of some sort of largesse, right?
The attitudes that these beliefs provoke are very redeeming. They do not provoke competition, jealousy, fear, and exclusion.
Right.
But there's the reason why the earth has been at the center of human groups and this bonding.
So then this gets us to animism.
Yes.
We're moving up to the next realm to shamanism, and then we have an intermediary, a leader.
Yes.
That spends his or her life sort of becoming a liaison between the supernatural and the natural.
Who's intermediary. We could call this liaison, this intermediary, who is either gifted with or who is working on behalf of you to connect you to those entities, making it easier. And that's not like the priestly control. I hate to call it that, but the fascist priestly cultures are not the same as the shamanic doctors, healers of the indigenous peoples who are leading a less sedentary but also more hunter-gatherer form of
somewhat of a simpler, more connected.
So they're not building houses. There are phases in this process of human prehistory where humans are moving around on animals or just moving from place to place in search of pastures, and they're carrying their beliefs with them.
So with this shamanistic legacy, you get these individuals who bring down the rain or speak to the ancestors.
Yes.
or they take the ancestral spirits and they speak to those that are living.
Yes.
And provide them with a vehicle for their angst and concerns and sorrow, and they transform that time, that period, to allow them to vent and grieve and deal with their problems and feel better about themselves afterwards.
They have dedicated their entire lives to just being a vehicle, a receptor, a channel for these spirits. And
they're the native doctors and the native psychologists and psychiatrists.
Right. Yes. And that's the shaman is, if you look at it behaviorally, the shaman is dedicated. He or she travels, goes through hardships, accepts hardships willingly, is an ascetic figure, remains in isolation in order to come back, and so that others can reintegrate with that structure of perceptions. And so this is a very interesting phenomenon, and the shaman can thus, we are really moving or transitioning to religious themes, to studies of religious transcendental nature.
Now moving up to the highest level, we get to totemism. Now, in totemism, what happens occasionally is that it comes full circle because they have a indexical animal, an iconic entity, that becomes their totem, that they may see as some sort of an ancestral deity or animal human figure that they believe that they are descended from.
You have composite forms as well. You have an animal-human mixture. You have mixed forms, but to come back to your main point, Alan, even in this kind of shamanic, totemic, we can call it assignment. We are assigning an attribute, a spiritual personality or identity to an object.
Yes.
In everything that the shamanic religions, the indigenous and original religions of the world have been doing, the reference point is the human ability to view an image of itself with more heightened spiritual and supernatural attributes. Someone who is like me, but who is also not me, but not self, not just as I am, but who is like me and who understands me and who is my friend. This elemental friend, mate, deity. This is the contribution of the ancient religions. This is the contribution to the religions of the world. And it kind of stagnates with, you may say, for a moment, for a more unambitious way of conducting yourself. It may lead to a denial of technology, but no, technology is integral to this way of seeing things. Because when you're using an atlatl to hunt, when you're killing an animal in a certain way, so as not to give it pain and to maximize the nutritive value of this gift that you have received from nature. These are integral to this worldview, and they do not make you anti-technology. They make you use technology in a way in which you begin to see the presence of the deity in the technological equipment itself. And believe me, in this place called Milpa Alta, close to Mexico City, I met this artist whose works have been exhibited in London and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and who has not been paid for exhibiting, of course, because he was not quote-unquote famous, but he is like a kind of Nahuatl-speaking shaman, and he got a graduate degree in engineering from Sheffield, England, and now he uses these small circuits, Arduinos and sensors, actuators, to make puppets of Quetzalcoatl, the snake deity. And
Wow.
yeah, Palma. His name is Ferdinand Palma, and you can see him. You can look him up on YouTube. But what Palma told me, we were just talking for that entire afternoon over a couple of beers, and Palma was telling me that the sensors in these electronic puppets, they do not react in the same way on all occasions, in all instances of exhibitions. And he says this from that same shamanic perspective.
Wow.
That is when the circuit board, the Arduino sensor, is reacting to the environment in a way in which it seems that there is a turtle spirit hidden.
Hidden in the sensor. Got it.
Absolutely. And
I think that's a great place to quit. Okay, gang, there'll be more coming. God bless you. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Tirtha. And see you on the flip-flop, gang. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.